Nazi Germany's panzers storm across the North African desert.
Well, you certainly don't have to look very hard to see signs of the battle that raged here.
Fighting a lethal game of cat and mouse.
Anti-tank gun ahead! Turn around, turn around! Let's get out of here!
The desert is turned into a brutal killing zone.
Never seen an entire shell like that just lying there.
Masterminded by one of Nazi Germany's greatest generals.
It's here that Rommel puts in his attack. 200 panzers, over 1,000 support vehicles, charging across the plain.
But when Nazi battle plans falter,
Enemy fighters! Stop the car!
Rommel and Hitler clash over strategy.
I will not accept this kind of insubordination.
Fought across one of World War II's toughest battlegrounds, this is the story of Hitler's Desert War. The biggest construction projects of World War II, ordered by Hitler and his Japanese allies. Now these ruins survive as dark reminders of their fanatical military ambition, and the Allies fight to overcome it. These are the secrets of the Nazi megastructures.
Stop!
19-year-old gunner Otto Henning is returning from a reconnaissance mission with Rommel's Afrika Korps.
All clear. Time to eat.
Otto's armored patrol unit is an advance guard, often scouting behind enemy lines under constant threat of attack.
Enemy aircraft, take cover!
Author James Holland is in Tunisia, near where Otto Henning is attacked, exploring one of Rommel's most important strongholds.
It's amazing to be here in this completely bleak, arid desert. But look at this here. Here's a bunker, and there's another one over there. And I'm looking around, there's another over there towards the sea. This is part of the Marif line, one of the strongest defensive positions in the whole of the North African battle campaign. And what a place this is. I mean, just look at it. It's so vast, it's so enormous. You've got the heat haze, it's absolutely relentless. I mean, what a place to fight a war.
The story of Hitler's Desert War begins in September 1940, when Hitler's Italian ally Mussolini tries to expand his African empire. Mussolini's army in the Italian colony of Libya attacks British-controlled Egypt, home to the highly strategic Suez Canal. The Italians advance just 60 miles into Egypt before the British counterattack, pursuing the Italians more than 500 miles back into Libya, as far as El Aguila. By early February 1941, over 130,000 Italian soldiers have surrendered. A humiliating disaster for fascist Italy and Mussolini's ally, Hitler. On February 6, 1941, Hitler appoints Erwin Rommel to command a new German army, the Afrika Korps. Its mission? To defeat the British in North Africa and prevent them using it as a launch pad to invade Europe.
Hitler considers the southern flank, the Mediterranean flank, of enormous strategic importance. If North Africa gets lost, suddenly the British might be in southern Europe, and that is just unconscionable. That cannot happen. He sends Rommel because Rommel has shown enormous cut and dash and success in the 1940 campaign in France, and he recognizes that he is the man to go down to North Africa and show the Italians how to do it.
Rommel arrives in Africa within a week of being appointed. Just over a month later, on March 24, 1941, he goes on the attack. It takes just 3 weeks for Rommel's army to push the British back 500 miles, just across the Egyptian border. This rapid advance overstretches Rommel's supply line, and by December 1941, Rommel's army is forced to retreat all the way back to El Agila.
All sides in North Africa very quickly discover this is a very different place in which to fight a war. The distances are just enormous, and how you feed your army, arm your army, keep them going, produces enormous numbers of challenges, and both sides have to learn very, very quickly, or else they're quite simply just going to lose.
Rommel is instinctively attack-minded. Despite orders from the Axis High Command to wait for more supplies, in January 1942, he launches another offensive towards Egypt. The advancing Africa Corps pushed the British back as far as Gazala, but the Axis High Command then forces Rommel to pause and rebuild his supplies. By May 1942, after 3 months waiting, he's itching to go on the attack again. After joining Rommel's army just 2 months earlier, young volunteer Otto Henning is yet to experience his first taste of combat.
Man, what are you looking at?
Rommel's coming down to see us.
No way. One afternoon in May 1942, a Feisler stork circled over our site and landed. General Oberst Rommel climbed out. I was able to take 2 pictures of him.
The legendary general's rapport and down-to-earth manner makes him very popular with his men. Soon after his visit, on May 26, 1942, Rommel launches a massive assault on the British defensive line. As usual, he leads his troops into battle from the front. Over 300 panzers formed the spearhead of his army's strike force. Rommel's plan is a frontal attack, coupled with a lightning thrust deep into the desert south of Gazala so as to outflank and encircle the British. Around 3/4 of Rommel's tank in his attack force are Panzer Mark IIIs. Today, it's rare to find a Panzer III that fought with Rommel in North Africa, but historian James Holland has come to see a remarkable survivor.
Well, look at this, the Panzer Mark III, and it's just such a good-looking tank, isn't it? And really, it's the Germans' first main battle tank. This is Rommel's workhorse. It's got a very effective gun, 50mm, not as big as the ones that were to come later on in the war, but in early 1942, this packs a massive punch. Lots of good armor. It's also got a couple of MG-34s, and in this case, a third one up on the turret as well. Good rate of fire, so the whole thing is bristling with weaponry. I tell you what, you've got to pity the crew. 5 men in this machine, and in the western desert with all its heat, so hot you can fry eggs on the metal. Just imagine being inside it with all the dust and smoke and fumes and sand getting in. I mean, that is really brutal to operate, but a very deadly and effective weapon all the same.
In the flat, open desert, with so few natural features to fortify, the relative firepower of each army's weaponry is more important than ever. So when Rommel's Panzer Mark IIIs speed into battle at Gazala and meet a hail of fire from a totally unexpected Allied weapon, it's a crucial encounter.
This is the M3 Grant, and they have a 75mm gun which can outdo anything the Panzer III had. And the Grant really was the biggest tank on the battlefield at Gazala.
A new American-built tank hot off the production line, the M3 Grant is urgently shipped in by the British just in time for its first use in combat at Gazala.
It is, however, a bit of a rush job. It's held together with rivets. And of course, what happens is a shell hits there, doesn't penetrate, the armor does its job, but the force of it causes these to shear off and can be absolutely lethal. You can imagine the shock, can't you, of the Afrika Korps when they emerge through the smoke and dust and come face to face with these, with its great big gun.
Ambushed by nearly 170 M3 tanks, over a third of Rommel's panzers are destroyed or put out of action within the first 24 hours of battle. The Afrika Korps are on the brink of a disastrous defeat, with the entire North African campaign and Rommel's legendary reputation hanging in the balance. June 1942. Rommel's panzers have taken heavy losses at the Battle of Gazala in Libya, facing the Allies' unexpected M3 tanks. Now Rommel prepares to counterattack with his own surprising weapon, the 88mm anti-tank gun, originally designed for shooting down aircraft. Conflict archaeologist Professor Tony Pollard is in North Africa to see Rommel's most feared and effective weapon.
I'm looking at a legend. This is the Flak 88, probably the most famous gun of World War II. It's a beast, weighs 5 tons. And look at the length of that barrel, it's a killer. At the back, I can see clues to its anti-aircraft role. There's that cogged wheel underneath. If I had the strength, I could press down on the breech and the barrel would point up almost vertically. Important if you're going to be shooting down planes. And it's on a turntable. You can turn it 360 degrees. But the thing that makes it a really powerful anti-tank gun is the ability for that barrel to come down. And in the open environment of the desert where you've got a clear view, this will kill any Allied tank at a range of up to 2 miles. And they've got nothing they can hit back with. Their guns are pea shooters compared to this monster.
On June 13th, 1942, Rommel's Flak 88s dramatically turned the tables at Gazala, helping to destroy 230 British tanks in a day. The British flee the battlefield, and Rommel wins a resounding victory.
By this stage, he's known as the Desert Fox. It's a reputation that just gets bolstered and bolstered and bolstered.
Just a few days after victory at Gazala, Rommel's Panzer Army goes on to capture the nearby port of Tobruk and more than 30,000 British prisoners. To celebrate the victory, Hitler immediately promotes Rommel to Field Marshal. Keen to press home his advantage over the British, Rommel writes a speech to inspire his troops to even greater victories.
Soldiers of the Panzerarmee Afrika, the great battle has been crowned by your quick conquest of Tobruk. Now for the complete destruction of the enemy.
Rommel's career is massively in the ascendancy at this moment. The problem he's got, though, is his supply lines are getting ever longer, and a more cautious general would unquestionably have paused, taken stock, gathered his strength. But no, that's not the Rommel way, and so he charges off across Libya into Egypt, hundreds of miles in pursuit of the British Army.
In just over a week, Rommel's rampaging army advances over 300 miles from Tobruk, deep into Egypt, with Alexandria, Cairo, and the vitally strategic Suez Canal in its sights. In a desperate attempt to stop Rommel's advance, British forces dig in along a 40-mile front between the Egyptian coastal town of El Alamein and the vast natural obstacle of the Qattara Depression. Conflict archaeologist Professor Tony Pollard has come to the Qattara Depression to discover why it's such a problem for Rommel's advancing army.
Look at this view. That is staggering. The desert floor just drops away here, and there's another desert down there. It's like a lost world. In places, this is almost 400 feet or more below sea level. The depression stretches away for about 200 miles in that direction. Standing here, you can see why the British chose to make their stand at El Alamein. This is a huge headache for Rommel. You might be able to get a tank into it, but on the floor it's salt marshes and soft sand. It's just impassable. He hasn't got time or fuel to drive his panzers 200 miles in that direction to get around the other side.
Outflanking the British is impossible. Rommel has only one option available. He must attack the El Alamein defensive line head-on. It will be a make-or-break encounter. July 1st, 1942. Rommel's Panzer Army attacks the British head-on at El Alamein in Egypt. Around 100,000 strong, the Panzer Army face 150,000 Allied soldiers and superior Allied air power. After a month of brutal conflict, the Panzer Army is still unable to break through, and Rommel's long and precarious supply line is becoming more and more of a problem.
It's in August 1942 that the tide really starts to turn against Rommel and his Panzer Army. And the cause directly is the little tiny island in the Mediterranean of Malta, which has been massively bombed by the Germans, but has started to recover. And as a result of that, British aircraft, submarines, ships operating from Malta really start to turn the tide of North Africa.
Shipping convoys crossing from Italy to access ports in Libya are crucial to Rommel's supply line. But they are vulnerable to attack from the British colony of Malta. During August 1942, only a third of the supplies that Rommel needs make it safely across the Mediterranean. His Panzer Army is running short of weapons, ammunition, fuel, and food. Conflict archaeologist Professor Tony Pollard is at El Alamein battlefield, searching for fighting positions used by Rommel's weakened army.
Out here, even the slightest ridge or promontory can give you an advantage because you can see further. And here we've got a lovely ridge running along in that direction. And I've just spotted the dead giveaway out here, lines of stones. Sand has blown up against this small wall which curves around that telltale shape of a military position. Stones at the back here, and there again, in front, there's another one, big enough to accommodate a machine gun. There may have been a platoon up here, maybe 30 or so men. Just imagine being posted here. Supplies are running low, under enemy bombardment. But the real enemy here is the environment. Just look at that desert.
The Panzer Army's inadequate food and supplies, together with the desert's blazing midsummer heat, result in almost 10,000 of Rommel's troops falling sick in August alone. In contrast, the British Army is much better supplied, as large shipping convoys are able to arrive safely in Egypt via the Suez Canal.
By the end of August, Rommel knows that very soon the British are going to have an overwhelming superiority in material strength, one that he will not be able to combat. And so he prepares for one last attack. This is a do-or-die gambler's throw of the dice, but it's also dependent on much-needed supplies of fuel arriving. And he knows that there are these 6 tankers that are due to cross the Mediterranean and supply his Panzer Army. This is something that is absolutely essential for success. On that basis, he presses the order button. Let's go, launch the attack.
Hoping victory will soon lead to the capture of Alexandria, Cairo, and the crucial Suez Canal, Rommel decides to attack the El Alamein defensive line near the outcrop of Qaryat el Himamat. This is the weakest part of the British battle line, according to German intelligence.
That dramatic outcrop's a really important landmark. It's close to the southern end of the battle line, and it's here that Rommel puts in his attack. 200 panzers, over 1,000 support vehicles charging across the plain. It's a really risky undertaking. If Rommel has any chance of success, speed is of the essence.
Rommel launches his attack on August 30th, 1942. But British defenses are stronger than expected, and progress is slow. To make matters worse, all the fuel tankers that Rommel gambled would safely cross the Mediterranean are sunk en route. As Rommel's panzers have too little fuel to outflank the British defenses as planned, he's forced to redirect his attack north towards Alam Halfa Ridge, even though he knows the British are waiting there in strength. As the battle rages around Alam Halfa, some of Rommel's panzers even run out of fuel completely and grind to a halt. On the second full day of the battle, Otto Henning's reconnaissance unit is protecting the flank of Rommel's panzer spearhead, scouting ahead to check on British positions.
Anti-tank gun ahead! Turn around, turn around! Let's get out of here! A 40mm shell had hit the left front of our armored vehicle and gone straight through it. Incredible. Straight through, from one side to the other, without exploding. Look at this. We were lucky.
At the heart of the battle, Rommel's panzers come under sustained attack by the British Air Force. Rommel, as usual, is leading his army from the front.
Enemy vitals! Stop the car!
Between 10 and 12 o'clock, we were bombed no less than 6 times by British aircraft. On one occasion, I only just had time to throw myself into a slit trench before the bombs fell. Swarms of low-flying fighter bombers were coming back to the attack again and again. My troops suffered tremendous casualties.
To avoid the Panzer Army's total destruction, Rommel reluctantly orders a retreat to his army's original positions along the El Alamein battle line. With insufficient remaining firepower to have any chance of making another more successful attack, Rommel decides his only option now is to go on the defensive. September 1942. After narrowly escaping annihilation at Alam Halfa Ridge, Rommel's Panzer Army has been forced onto the defensive at El Alamein. As his army digs in, Rommel decides to fly to Germany.
After Alam Halfa, Rommel correctly recognizes that the British can afford to build up their strength to a point where, when they attack, it is with the certainty of victory. With this in mind, he recognizes that he's got a little bit of time on his hand, and so takes this opportunity to go back to Germany for medical treatment.
While Rommel is away, being treated for stomach and blood pressure problems, his troops spend September and October 1942 reinforcing their new defensive line. Conflict archaeologist Professor Tony Pollard is exploring the desert terrain at El Alamein, looking for any signs that remain of the Panzer Army's defensive line.
Looking for clues in the landscape. It's a question of getting your eye in. And this band of clean sand is very suspicious. It runs across the top of this ridge, which would be a good position for fortifications. So I've followed it up here. It's coming around. I think it might be a trench. Oh, hang on. What's this? That's not a stone. This is a cartridge case from the battle. The bullet, the head, the bit that does the damage and flies through the air is gone. So this has been fired from this position in a rifle or perhaps a light machine gun. It's been battered by the sand, but I can still see the groove at the bottom. That's enough to tell me that this was fired by an Axis weapon. Enough evidence to tie this position in with the Panzer Army.
But out in the desert today, there's no trace of the strongest part of the Panzer Army's defensive line.
The real defense is out there in front of us. And you can't see it, because what the Panzer Army does is it lays a minefield for the entire length of the battle line, 40 miles, and it's about 5 miles wide. We're talking here about 500,000 mines. They have such a bad reputation that they are nicknamed the Devil's Gardens. What you effectively have out there is an invisible fortress.
To make the killing zone of the Devil's Gardens as difficult as possible for the Allied army to cross, machine gun posts, field guns, anti-tank ditches, and barbed wire are placed amongst the mines. Panzers and Flak 88s provide a second line of defense, but there aren't enough to protect the entire 40-mile battle line. So it's vital the Panzer Army look for clues indicating where the British attack will come. Near the southern end of the El Alamein defensive line, the Panzer Army positions an observation post on the high Qariyat El Himamat outcrop overlooking the Allied front line.
And the Allies know that they're up here. It's so obvious. They're not silly, and they use it to their advantage. So what the Allies do is they build a fake army, construct dummy tanks and trucks, and park them up just inside. So those poor guys up here, battling the elements but peering out over the desert towards the Allied lines, they can see this build-up. And surely because of that, they're going to think that main attack is going to come in their direction.
The attack comes on October 23, 1942. But the main thrust of the Allied offensive isn't near Qariyat El Himamat. Instead, it's in the north, near the town of El Alamein on the coast. The Panzer Army is only just able to hold back the ferocious Allied assault. Rommel isn't there to lead them, as he's still recuperating in Europe. Hitler decides he must intervene.
Rommel?
Herr Generalfeldmarschall.
I do hope your condition is improving.
Besserungen sind.
The situation in Africa is dire.
General Stumme is missing.
Presumed killed or captured, and there is no one with your technical skill to lead the campaign.
Field Marshal, I must request that you rejoin the field of battle immediately.
I will fly back at first light.
Danke.
Thank you, Field Marshal.
Within 24 hours, Rommel's back at the front and is trying to weave his magic once more, but it's a busted flush because the enemy are overwhelming in their strength. The Panzer Army is really short of supplies, there's no hope of any more coming, and Rommel starts to recognize within hours of arriving back at the front that this is a battle that's going to be lost.
After another week or so of ferocious fighting, the Panzer Army's crumbling defensive line at El Alamein finally breaks. Just 30 panzers are left to face over 600 British tanks. Rommel accepts that further resistance is futile. He orders his depleted army to flee for their lives. But when news comes of the order to retreat, Otto Henning's armored car won't start.
Come on! Try it again!
The urgently retreating Panzer Army convoy is only just ahead of the pursuing British.
Quick! Get it going!
Luckily, a passing lorry stops to help.
Thank God! You've got to help us.
Once his armored car is restarted, Otto Henning joins the Panzer Army convoy, retreating fast across Egypt. Under constant attack by the British Air Force, Rommel's army must cross nearly 1,500 miles of desert to Tunisia if they're to have a hope of escaping with their lives. November 1942. After defeat at El Alamein, Rommel's Panzer Army is retreating towards Tunisia, pursued by the British Army and Air Force. And Rommel's problems are about to worsen. On November 8, 1942, the USA enters the battle for North Africa. The Americans and their British allies launch a massive amphibious invasion of Vichy French Morocco and Algeria and start to march east towards Tunisia. Rommel's retreating army now faces being trapped in a pincer between two huge Allied armies.
For many of the Germans on the ground, it's absolutely clear that North Africa is lost. If they're going to pull out, this is the time to do it. Of course, Hitler being Hitler, it's kind of no retreat, particularly because he quite rightly recognizes that if North Africa falls, the Allies will use their success in North Africa as a springboard for the invasion of southern Europe. And so he takes a decision to massively reinforce North Africa.
Speed is essential to counter the Allied advance in North Africa from both east and west. So Hitler chooses Tunisia as the best place to fight back. Axis airfields such as Castelvetrano in Sicily are so close that reinforcements can quickly be flown in to hold Tunisia until Rommel's retreating army arrives. Former British Army Captain Patrick Bury is at the now disused Castelvetrano airfield in Sicily, looking for clues as to how Hitler is able to reinforce Tunisia so quickly.
You can see here underfoot, there's asphalt and hardcore of an old paved runway. And many of the airstrips in World War II are actually grass. But you need a paved runway if you're going to operate heavy aircraft. And that is exactly what Hitler needs to do. He's got to get as many troops and as much equipment as fast as possible over to North Africa. And luckily for Hitler, just at the exact time that he needs to do this, his aeronautical engineers go and design the largest land-based transport aircraft ever made, the gigantic Messerschmitt 323.
The Luftwaffe's revolutionary six-engined Messerschmitt 323 can carry over 5 times as much as regular transport planes, up to 12 tons of equipment, or 130 soldiers. 15 of these giants are used round the clock throughout November 1942, carrying huge numbers of troops and vast amounts of weapons, ammunition, and supplies to Tunisia. As Rommel's Panzer Army races across Libya towards Tunisia, Rommel receives an order from Hitler to halt the retreat and fight back against the pursuing British army. Rommel is certain this will be suicide for his men and decides to fly to Germany to try to reason with Hitler.
Herr Generalfeldmarschall.
Mein Führer.
Your army has buckled in a matter of weeks from a position of strength to one of total disarray.
Durcheinander gebracht.
What is your explanation?
Mein Führer, the fuel situation is disastrous. And only 5,000 of the 15,000 fighting troops have weapons.
Then what have you done with them? Have you thrown them away? This kind of mindset is what stands between defeat and victory. It is a political necessity to continue to hold a major bridgehead in Africa.
Mein Führer, one cannot fight against tanks with rifles. Perhaps you should come and see for yourself.
I will not accept this kind of insubordination. You will return to your post and follow my orders to the letter.
Rommel returns to Libya and reluctantly tries to fight back. The attempt is futile, and soon he's back on the retreat. By early February 1943, Rommel's battered Panzer Army finally reaches Tunisia. Even here, there's no respite. Almost all Hitler's reinforcements are fighting the Americans advancing from the west. So Rommel's army alone must face the British pursuing from the east. Rommel decides his best chance of success is to use the defenses of the so-called Mareth Line. Historian James Holland has come to the Mareth Line to explore the Panzer Army's last hope of staving off defeat.
Well, I'm walking in the Wadi Zigzag, and this is a seasonal riverbed. What a natural anti-tank ditch. You can understand exactly why Rommel would want to retreat behind this, because it's an incredibly strong natural defensive position. And then, if you look up there, there's a bunker. Originally built by the French before the war, but Rommel can use that, no problem at all. Thank you very much.
A 22-mile line of defensive bunkers built in the 1930s, the Mareth Line stretches all the way along the Wadi Zigzag, from the Matmata Hills to the coast.
Well, I've got to say, this is looking a lot like a little trench system here. You've got a fork to the right and this one to the left leading up to the bunker here. And of course it makes sense because you'd want all these positions to be interconnected, but amazing to see this after all these years. Oh. Well, that's one really good view. I mean, that gives you a tremendous field of fire as a machine gunner. This is a really strong position to hold.
Rommel knows he has a few days' grace before the advancing British Army can arrive at the Mareth Line. And so he decides that before fighting a last-ditch defensive battle here, there's just enough time to surprise everyone by mounting one more attack. March 1943. Rommel is at his headquarters at the Mareth Line in Tunisia, contemplating a surprise attack on the advancing British Army. Historian James Holland has come to explore Rommel's command post.
It really is incredibly atmospheric here. And look at that, you know, snuck in against the edge of the hill, hidden from enemy guns, it's hidden from the prying eyes of enemy aircraft. Really, it's the perfect place for Rommel to put his command post. Oh goodness, look at this. This goes back into the hillside. Gosh, it goes on and on. Little lizards, look, the only ones living here now. And rooms. I'm guessing sort of communications room. I mean, you can see where there would have been electric cables all the way through here. You can still see the marks on the wall. My goodness, look at that. I'll tell you what, that, unless I'm very much mistaken, is the Berghof. That's Hitler's home in Berchtesgaden. I'm imagining some German thinking about his Führer and pining for the cool mountain air of the Bavarian Alps. I've got to say, I was not expecting that. And you can imagine, can't you, sort of tables along here, maps on the walls, telephones. It doesn't take much of a leap of an imagination, even though it's completely empty now.
Rommel's plan is to make a surprise attack on a small advance guard of the British Army before they reach the Mareth Line. But by the time Rommel is able to launch his assault on March 6, 1943, the rest of the British Army has arrived, joining their advance guard. As a result, the Panzer Army suffers heavy losses. Rommel orders a retreat back towards the Mareth Line. 2 days into the retreat, Otto Henning is taking a short break from patrolling with his armored reconnaissance unit.
Enemy aircraft, take cover!
Over the past year, Otto Henning has escaped many close shaves with death, and once again he lives to fight on. Rommel is now convinced his army will be annihilated if it continues to fight in Tunisia, despite the strong defenses of the Mareth Line. So he flies out of Africa once again to try to persuade Hitler to save the Panzer Army for more important battles to come in Europe.
Mein Führer, we must evacuate our troops from North Africa, like the British did at Dunkirk. I can personally guarantee that with these troops I would beat off any Allied invasion in southern Europe.
After everything that has happened, Field Marshal, you have become a pessimist. You need some time to regain your appetite for combat. I order you to take some sick leave and get yourself in the right frame of mind. This time, we will drive them out of the continent once and for all.
10 days after Rommel is replaced by a more optimistic commander, the Axis forces defending the Mareth Line are attacked by the British on March 20th, 1943.
Well, you certainly don't have to look very hard to see signs of the battle that raged here. I mean, look at this bunker here. You've got this where a shell's obviously hit, and then little sort of pot marks all over the place. That's machine guns and rifle fire. And actually, now I'm looking, look, you can see bits of shrapnel on the ground here. Loads of little pieces all over the place. Oh, hang on a minute. Goodness me. Look at that. That's a shell. I mean, that is an unexploded shell over there, an artillery shell. Got the fuse on the end. How absolutely extraordinary. I've seen quite a lot of battle debris in my time, but I've never seen an entire shell like that just lying there.
Within a week of the British launching their assault, Axis forces are pushed into headlong retreat. 12 days later, the pursuing British army link up for the first time with American troops, closing in on the Axis forces from the west. By early May 1943, trapped in a tiny pocket of northern Tunisia, and with their chance of evacuation now long gone, all Axis forces in Tunisia unconditionally surrender to the Allies.
Hitler might have done better to have listened to Rommel, because the defeat in North Africa is a colossal one. 250,000 men, more than a lost at Stalingrad just a couple of months earlier, with so much precious equipment. It really cannot be overestimated just how catastrophic a defeat that is in North Africa for the Germans.
Otto Henning luckily escaped capture in Tunisia, as he was granted home leave a month before the surrender. He went on to survive the war and died in 2012 at the age of 88. In 1944, Rommel was accused of involvement in the plot to assassinate Hitler and forced to commit suicide. Rommel never knew the full story of why his desert blitzkrieg in North Africa failed. Decades later, it was revealed that the Enigma code used for German military communications had been cracked. So the Allies often knew Rommel's plans in advance.